Star Wars Galactic Heroes, Force Battlers, Episode 3 action figures.
It's no secret that Star Wars toys make a lot of money. Back in 1975, Fox executives didn't see much value in George Lucas's weird Flash Gordon fan film, and were all too happy to leave him with all merchandising rights. A decision which essentially allowed George to make himself into a billionaire simply by signing off on Darth Vader Mighty Mugs. Unfortunately, this close proximity to the merchandise machine creates something of a conflict of interest. Over the years, numerous Star Wars characters created under Lucas's tenure have been accused of serving only to sell toys. And a tragically common inclusion on this list is my favourite character, General Grievous, with sites like What Culture going so far as to declare him not so much a character as an action figure. Is General Grievous really just a toy? To find out, let's explore the history of Grievous's character throughout the Star Wars franchise, as well as the toys that were allegedly the crux for his creation. General Grievous was created by George Lucas for Revenge of the Sith, filling the role of Palpatine's new right-hand man. However, the character's first official appearance would come more than a year before the movie's release, in Genndy Tartakovsky's Clone Wars micro-series, and it was quite the first impression. This series presented a monstrous, animalistic Grievous who hunted Jedi for sport and was capable of taking on several at once. Throughout the series, we saw his training from Count Dooku, his capture of Palpatine on Coruscant, and a rivalry with Shaak Ti, likely meant to tie in with this deleted scene from Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, I got dead again. This game stinks.
Notably, this Grievous featured a sinister, upper-class voice provided by John DiMaggio and later Richard McGonagall.
Run, Jedi, run. You have only prolonged the inevitable.
Grievous's colours also changed over the series run, going from the futuristic whites and blues of Warren Fu's concept art to an Episode 3 inspired colour scheme in the series finale. Both of these looks were represented in the series toy line, with the latter being exclusive to a box set with Obi-Wan and Cody. And you know, for a character supposedly created to sell toys, these initial action figures are pretty underwhelming. With articulation limited to a ball-jointed head and a couple of swivels, there's little room for posability outside of this one preset stance. It's a little disappointing given that most other Star Wars toys at the time were taking great strides in breaking out of the traditional 5-point articulation scheme. Though the sharp sculpting and swooping proportions do allow this one pose to be captured about as perfectly as one could hope for. However, this also feeds into a separate problem. All of the figures in the range are designed to stand at exactly 3 3/4 inches tall, regardless of their stance. As such, characters that are standing up straight appear ridiculously tiny compared to those that are crouched down. With an extremely memorable on-screen debut, Clone Wars' iteration of Grievous made a big impact, well eclipsing the mediocre tie-in toys. But things felt a little different when the character finally made his theatrical entrance. As soon as General Grievous appears on screen in Revenge of the Sith, it's obvious that George had completely changed his mind on what he wanted from the character. In place of the quiet yet menacing personality of the Clone Wars rendition, this Grievous was a cackling coward who more openly mocked the Jedi he faced, but would hastily retreat at the first sign of things not going his way. The traits he did share with his cartoon counterpart were also heavily exaggerated, such as his hunchbacked appearance and affinity for collecting lightsabers.
Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection.
Clone Wars would attempt to reconcile some of these differences in its final episodes by having Grievous's chest plate crushed by Mace Windu, explaining his persistent cough, and declaring his cowardice to actually be part of Dooku's instruction.
For if any one element is lacking, it would be best for you to retreat. You must break them before you engage them.
However, these changes to the movie version of the character didn't prevent him from being just as memorable, albeit for different reasons. With a raspy, roughly Russian voice provided by sound designer Matthew Wood, combined with his more classically villainous personality, Grievous provides some of the most quotable moments of the movie as he becomes the final pillar of the Separatists.
Time to abandon ship.
Most notably, Lucas also gave Grievous an extra pair of arms, allowing him to wield 4 lightsabers, a defining trait of the character going forward. As one of the main villains of the movie, Grievous saw a huge influx of new toys in the Revenge of the Sith range, from tiny Lego minifigures to a towering 12-inch toy and just about everything in between. The main attraction, of course, were the 3 3/4-inch action figures, of which Grievous received 3. The first, a sneak preview figure featuring a single blue lightsaber and a hard plastic white cape. The second, a 4-armed figure with a spring-loaded attack feature. And finally, a version with an exploding body gimmick, presumably meant to replicate his death at the hands of Obi-Wan. Each of these figures capture Grievous's look to a decent degree, though there are some small inaccuracies in the paint. One recurring theme is that the faceplate, which usually looks fierce and angry, is depicted here as just looking extremely sad and beat down. Each of them also feature a fairly similar amount of articulation, but the 4-armed version is by far the best in terms of playability. With arms that are just pliable enough to go for a 2-armed look, and how well integrated the play gimmick is, for the time this figure was a near perfect representation of the movie design. And that's kind of the problem. Grievous's abundance of built-in abilities are what lead many to write him off as just fodder for merchandising. And with how effortlessly these clearly toyetic gimmicks such as his 4 arms have always translated into toy form, it's difficult to argue that that's not what they were intended for.
Hey, wait a minute.
So again, the idea here is that George Lucas purposely packed Grievous full of gimmicks specifically to sell toys, and yet the most prominent of these features didn't even exist until after Grievous had already been introduced to toy store shelves. Furthermore, the cartoon showed off several other highly toyetic features, so why doesn't movie Grievous have any of those? Why aren't there Revenge of the Sith themed toys that can fold up like this, or ones with these wires shooting out of the wrists, or ones that can slide around all their armor panels? Surely if Grievous was just a vehicle to sell action figures, Lucas would be showing off every action feature possible. With this sequence of events, it's clear that there was more to Grievous's creation than just toys. But that doesn't mean there was any shortage of them, as the character remained a steady presence in Star Wars toy lines for the next several years. Some of the most interesting include one depicting his pre-cyborg Kalish form, his original concept art design, and a second one depicting his death.
Hey man, that's not cool.
Shortly after, Grievous would return to TV screens as one of the main recurring villains in 2008's Star Wars Clone Wars.
Oh, that's real creative.
With Matt Wood returning to voice the character, this series used Revenge of the Sith as its main inspiration. Unfortunately, being the main villain in an episodic cartoon has one big downside: you tend to lose a lot. In this show, Grievous was taken down by Padawans, younglings and Gungans, further exacerbating his weakened post-movie reputation. Grievous did have some victories in this series, however, such as genociding the Night Sisters and defending his home from Kit Fisto. However, it was also in this latter episode that we received one of the most controversial changes to the character: a new backstory. Around the release of Episode 3, Grievous's origin story was told in a short series of comics. In this version of events, he had once been a fully organic Kaleesh warrior who led his people against the invading Yamri alongside his beloved wife. Pushed to the brink of defeat, the invaders sought help from the Republic, who, failing to understand the context of the war, placed heavy sanctions on Grievous's people. With this, the Yamri were able to easily take over Kalee and kill Grievous's wife in the process. It was this event that inspired Grievous's hatred for the Republic and the Jedi. This soon brought him into contact with Count Dooku and Darth Sidious, who secretly had his ship blown up and his mind altered to believe the Jedi were responsible. Now mortally wounded by the explosion, Grievous was rebuilt as a cyborg and made to lead the separatist droid armies against the Republic. In contrast, the Clone Wars shows Grievous's transformation to be a gradual process, implied to be born purely out of envy and a lust for power.
George had a lot of ideas about where he thought Grievous came from and what he thought Grievous was about. One of the things that George had mentioned was that he had really wanted to be a Jedi.
But he wasn't Force sensitive. He wasn't able to use the Force. He knew he could never be a Sith Lord.
Sometimes I wonder why you submitted to the changes.
Improvements! I submit to no one. I chose them.
With this change, as well as Disney's declaration that all comics and cartoons before the 2008 show would no longer be canon, this new, more cowardly Grievous was made the definitive version, and any sympathetic aspects of his character were stripped away. Along with this new origin, the Clone Wars gave Grievous a more buff, brutish design, which was very accurately captured in the series' tie-in toys. Among them, a brand new LEGO minifigure mold, a larger scale Force battler featuring lights and sounds, and a new 3 3/4 inch figure released in both regular and holographic varieties. One key innovation from this figure was the introduction of interchangeable pieces for the 2 and 4 armed looks. A slightly stranger addition was the inclusion of a blaster. I know Grievous occasionally uses one, but is it that intrinsic to his identity that he needs one packed in with him? But with this, 2 sets of arms and 4 lightsabers, it does help to make this one of the best value toys in the line, so I don't know what I'm really complaining about. After the initial cancellation of the Clone Wars in 2013, Grievous noticeably took a back seat in Star Wars media, appearing only in small secondary roles outside of Battlefront 2 and one comic story. His presence in toys was less consistent as well, and strangely one of the few that were released was a LEGO set that paired him up with Mace Windu, a matchup that we'd only ever seen in the 03 cartoon. With the original Clone Wars briefly thrust back into the spotlight like this, many took the time to look back at its depiction of Grievous, coming to the conclusion that it was superior to the version presented in Revenge of the Sith and beyond. There soon came a growing consensus that the character should have remained a competent, tragic, badass Jedi killer rather than a coughing cartoon bad guy. And I completely disagree. Let's start with Grievous's origin story, the one that everyone was so upset with the Clone Wars for changing. Here we see an unstoppable Jedi killer forced into becoming a cyborg with a tragic romantic backstory partially influenced by Darth Sidious.
Ha! Never heard that one before.
Now, some overlap with Darth Vader is to be expected, as this was one of the key parts of Lucas's vision for the character.
I came up with the idea of General Grievous as a leader of the droid armies. He's kind of a little bit of an alien in a droid shell, which is sort of an echo of what Anakin is going to become.
But by making Grievous's journey into becoming a cyborg more distinct, it allows him to act as a shadow of Darth Vader without being in Darth Vader's shadow. More controversially, I also think that Grievous's characterization has benefited from its changes. Beyond his overall more wrathful personality, which is often used to entertaining effect,
they got away, sir.
His presentation greatly increases his symbolic value to the story of the Star Wars saga. In Revenge of the Sith, as well as the 3D Clone Wars, Grievous is a less skilled warrior who fails to understand the nuances of lightsaber combat, relying on speed and brute strength to overwhelm his opponent. Similarly, he is shown to have no respect for the Jedi or their traditions, in contrast to his 2D appearance, where he at least treats the Jedi as worthy opponents. These aspects strengthen Grievous's symbolic value, as they heavily mirror many of the shortcomings within the Jedi Order that ultimately lead to their downfall. Grievous takes a weapon intended as a peacekeeping tool and treats it as little more than a club to bully others into submission. This is akin to the way the Jedi have been turned into weapons of war.
We're keepers of the peace, not soldiers.
Bring in the flamethrowers!
By perverting and misusing one of the key symbols of the Order, Grievous personifies the ongoing destruction of the Jedi's values from both outside and within. This goes hand in hand with Grievous's role in the plot of Episode 3. A common complaint about Grievous in the movie is that his battle with Obi-Wan feels like a red herring, but that's kind of the point. The Jedi are so eager to kill Grievous because they blindly presume his death will end the war and return the Republic to normal. But once they do, it's quickly revealed that it's already far too late. By making Grievous a more arrogant, brutish character and adorning him with the symbols of the Jedi, his death is able to demonstrate the consequences of the Jedi's own arrogance and brutishness. This is further accentuated with a change to the character's design, the shift from a stark white to a more bony tan. This takes Grievous's already skeletal design and makes it even more akin to a grim omen of death, a reminder of the, at this point, inevitable demise of the Jedi.
You must realize you are doomed.
While I can't fault anyone for saying, "Oh, Grievous got nerfed" in response to this new characterization, in my view, it exponentially increases his importance to the story of the Star Wars saga overall. It elevates him from Darth Vader 2.0 to a distinct character who, in his own way, personifies the destruction of the Jedi throughout the prequels. Not that any of this really matters, since he hasn't had any significant role in media for almost a decade, despite a gigantic influx of prequel-related media. Conversely, from around 2019 onwards, there has been a renaissance of new Grievous action figures. Some of the smaller scale toys from this period include a simplified vintage-style figure and a toy box figure in the style of Disney Infinity. On the complete opposite end of the scale spectrum, Sideshow Toys released a 1/6 scale figure in 2014 and again in 2022, though I think the premium format title may be a bit ill-fitting. This figure is notorious for its floppy and easily breakable design, despite its luxury price tag. Strangely, the head sculpt grossly exaggerates the features of the head, giving it an overly organic look. The chest plates also open up to reveal the organ sac, but they're sculpted in a way that leaves a big ugly gap between them. Thankfully, there's since been a Hot Toys figure announced, which looks a lot better and will hopefully address the quality problems. For me though, my interests lie somewhere in the middle, but for a long time there was an absence of any Grievous figures to scale with the 6-inch Black Series line. One potential contender came with the Disney Elite series, but its heavy die-cast construction and weak joints mean it can barely stand under its own weight, let alone hold any convincing poses. A more serious attempt followed from Bandai in 2017. The only catch? You have to put it together. Don't get me wrong, model kits can be extremely fun to build, but Grievous comes with some of the most ridiculously tiny parts I've ever seen, and there are several steps where things need to be threaded through each other in a very confusing fashion. Once it does all come together though, the sculpt and range of articulation are incredible. Both this and the aforementioned Sideshow toy use the interchangeable arms introduced in the Clone Wars line. but in these cases each individual limb is fully articulated. Sadly, even when fully built, there are some clear downsides to the model kit medium. While all the joints are very well engineered and have excellent range of motion, the very lightweight plastic means you need to be extremely careful when posing. It doesn't take much to break things, especially the wrist sockets or the fins on the side of the head. The cape is also a little strange. It's made out of the same cheesecloth type material as Lego capes, but it has this big shoulder pad piece, which captures Grievous's hunchback quite well, but severely limits the articulation. The main benefit of a model kit though is that it encourages custom paint and weathering, meaning the level of detail is entirely up to the buyer. But if you're an amateur like me, it's easy to go overboard. While the Bandai Model Kit was a solid representation of Grievous in 6-inch form, its fragile nature made it less playable than a standard action figure. As such, the desire was still there for a more traditional toy at this scale.
I need something more real.
That demand was met in 2019 with the Star Wars Black Series General Grievous. Officially the first deluxe release in the line, this figure also captures the look exceptionally well. While the sculpted details can't be quite as sharp as the model kit, this more solid construction combined with some of the more fragile pieces being cast in a softer rubber means that this Grievous can handle a lot more physicality. The eyes are excellently decked out with face printing tech, but I think the rest of the paint is a bit lacking. The scratches around the eyes are slightly too large and just look like big lumps of dirt rather than battle damage, and I think these spots of silver weathering are a bit too splotchy. To justify deluxe pricing, this Grievous includes his ever-iconic blaster, 4 lightsabers and a fabric cape, complete with lightsaber pockets. Due to the mix of colours, the cape is doubly thick, and in product shots it looks like a blanket draped over a toddler, but the flexibility of the armour panels means it is possible to get it properly tucked away. It also suits the model kit quite well, which seems like a fairly obvious thing to test out, yet I don't think I've ever seen it done by anyone else online. However, it does also highlight the slightly larger scale of the model kit, but I don't think either one is necessarily inaccurate. Grievous is supposed to stand about a foot taller than the average human, but in some shots it's clear that he's been scaled up even further to appear more intimidating, so I think which figure is better sized is up to personal preference. Then again, the model kit's grossly oversized lightsabers might give it away. The Black Series Grievous returns to the built-in splitting arms of some of its earlier predecessors, but with extra joints in the biceps and forearms, joining the arms doesn't hinder articulation like it has in the past. However, it is worth making sure that the elbows are properly aligned in order to avoid stressing the plastic. The legs sadly don't hold up quite as well, as they often become loose and floppy before long. Luckily, the tolerances are significantly better on the subsequent releases of this mold, a battle-damaged variant based on Battlefront 2, and a version in Clone Wars colours complete with vintage-style packaging. While these two are more solid in terms of build quality, they create some confusion when it comes to pricing. The Clone Wars version was released at the price of a standard figure, alongside Mace Windu and Captain Fordo. ARC Trooper. However, it ditches the blaster and includes only a single-sided white cape. Well, that's fair enough, you gotta fit into that smaller price point somehow. But strangely, the Battlefront 2 version was released at the same price despite including only the lightsabers and nothing else. Are these tiny patches of paint that are isolated entirely to the front really worth the same as a soft goods cape?
The world may never know.
With that, we've come to the end of General Grievous's toy history, and unfortunately, pretty much the end of his media history as well. Even when the Clone Wars made its return for a final season in 2020, Grievous's only appearance consisted of him
standing there, menacingly!
The intimidating new model used for this shot was originally created for the scrapped Crystal Crisis arc, which was left out in favor of the final 12-episode season. But hey, why focus on one of the main villains of the series when you could be watching the Martez sisters go to jail, escape jail, and go straight back to jail again, yay. It was a similar story for the Bad Batch, where Grievous was shown only in recreated shots from Revenge of the Sith. His most recent role was in Tales of the Empire, in which he actually received some new lines, though this was merely a slightly different perspective on the Night Sisters episode from the Clone Wars. So to answer my initial question, is General Grievous more than just a toy? Yes, but lately it doesn't feel like it. Not because Grievous was ever intended purely to sell toys, but simply because he's been so woefully underutilized in all areas besides toys. And it sucks because, as we've seen here, there's so much more to this character than a couple of cool gimmicks. Whether he's a cackling cartoon villain or a monstrous murder machine, just as his true self is hidden under a cybernetic shell, Grievous has enormous potential if people are just willing to look under the surface.